Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel of the game of chess. And if you've seen the previous videos, we defeated a few of the bots. We have defeated all the bots up to rating 1300. And before we start with the next series of bots that are rated 1400, once again, time for the puzzle rush. I would like to invite you to play along with us, and for every new puzzle, pause and try to solve it yourself before you look at what I'm trying to do and what are my thoughts and whether I solved it or not. The rules of the game are the following. Chess.com is going to give us one puzzle after another, starting from the easiest and going to the more and more difficult. And once I hit three wrong puzzles, the game is over. The question is, how many puzzles can we get correct before we hit the third wrong? In the last time we tried, we made a new record, 44. Let's see, can we do better this time? And let me first share the screen with you. And here we are. We're going with survival mode. Let me explain. There are chess.com has three modes: the 3 minutes, the 5 minutes, and the survival. 3 minutes means that the game is over if you hit three wrong puzzles, but it's also over if you spend 3 minutes. There's a clock going downward starting from 3 minutes. The 5 minutes is the same, but instead of 3 minutes, you have 5 minutes. But the problem is that we want to learn. We are not competing against time. We are trying to get new knowledge and new skills. And especially if I'm going to discuss it with you, it's better if we don't have any time control. So we are going to the survival mode that you can spend as much time as you like until you hit the third wrong puzzle. And as I mentioned before, every time I go to the next one, I would like to ask you, please pause and try to solve it yourselves. And I'm starting with the first one now. Hopefully it's going to be the easiest. Let's see. Black has just checked the white king that goes to h1. But how can black continue? That is a question. It seems to be easy because if my rook goes to e1 and checks, white has only one response, takes the rook, and then we take the rook with the queen from e3 to e1. Then bishop goes to f1, and then we take the bishop, and it should be mate. Let's see if this is the case. Yes, we got the first one right. Let's go to the second one. Second one, rook attacks queen, but rook is undefended, so queen can take rook. How can white respond? They can place the bishop on c1, the knight on e1, but this can only delay the checkmate. Yes, we got it. Third one. This also looks like a backrank case. The rook from g2 can go to g1 check, queen goes to d1, and then rook takes queen. Yes, we got it. Next one. Seems quite similar. Back rank is when the king has three pawns in front of it that don't allow the king to escape in case of a check. So if rook goes from c8 to c1 check, then the rook from d4 goes to d1, the other one, and then rook takes rook and mate. Yes. Next one. Again, back rank. Usually the first ones have to deal with back ranks, and they're quite simple. If queen goes from a7 to a1 check, black can only defend with the rook and the queen, but there's no square where the one supports the other. You take the rook, and I'll take the queen. Let's see here what's happening. Doesn't seem to be back rank. There is a check if queen goes to c5. The king from g1 can go anywhere, or we can even cover with the queen to f2. The rook can go to d4, but it's lost because there's a pawn on e5. But no matter what white does, next move, we win the bishop at c4. Let's see if this is the answer. Yes, here it's not mate, but winning material. Here we have mate in one move. Queen from h3 goes to h7. It should be mate because the queen supported by the pawn on g6. What am I doing wrong? Queen goes here. Let's see here what's happening. Here you see the pawn on h3. This means that if queen goes to g2, it is mates, and the queen cannot be attacked if it goes to g2. The king has no escape, and the queen can easily go to g2 and mate. Next one. If queen from h6 goes to h2, it checks, supported by the bishop on f4, and it's mate. Let's see here what's happening. The bishop is in f2. It can check from g3, and then king can go either h1 or g1. If the bishop goes from b3 to b1, it's not exactly back rank, but the bishop on g3 blocks the two escape squares on f2 and h2, and the pawn on g2 also blocks the other escape square of the white king. Let's see if this is the case. Yes, a knight will, excuse me, a rook will temporarily delay the mate, but that's it. Here, you see the black king is in c8. It's very constrained, has nowhere to go. So if the queen checks from a6, king can only go to b8, queen to b7 mate. And you see we have to be in most of these puzzles in a hurry because black is ready to checkmate with queen to h2 if we don't check, if we do nothing. Let's see here what's happening. Once again, the combination bishop on c5, queen on f6, queen goes to f2, and the queen on d1 does not allow the white king to escape. We completed the first 12, as you see here, starting from the easiest 180 and going to the hardest until now 701, all of them 100% correct. And we continue with the next group, and they put them in groups of 12 because you'll see the check marks will go now to another line. If queen goes to h6, what can black king do? Queen controls two of the escape squares, and the bishop on f7, the third one, and it's mate. Here, this is back rank, but we need to be a little bit careful. Queen cannot go directly to f8 because rook on a8 will take it. Instead, queen goes to f7 check, king to h8, queen to f8 check, and now the rook goes to f8 and it's mate. Similar story here, back rank, but in 2 installments, and basically in 3 moves. Queen first checks, and after the king moves, queen checks again, is taken by the rook, but then the other black rook will deliver the mate. Good. Now, what can white do? Of course, if the f7 pawn was not there, rook goes to h7, it's mate. But now, if rook goes to b8, king goes to g7. If rook goes to g8, it check. The king cannot go to f6, because cannot take the knight because there's a queen on f1. The king can go to h6, and then I don't think there's mate. First of all, the queen is pinned, cannot move. But the knight goes to g4, check. Then takes the queen on e3, and if the rook from c1 takes the queen on f1, then the knight takes a rook. Hopefully, little by little, your vision will improve, and so you'll be able to see these things without moving the pieces, because in the real game, you cannot move the pieces. Of course, once in a while, we'll all make mistakes. I may make mistakes. You will make mistakes. Don't worry. That's how we learn. Yes, 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 and yes, exactly as we had predicted. And let's see what's happening here. If queen, no, there is no back rank. This is in fact the second rank. We have the bishop on b7 and the queen on e4 making a battery. So if the queen goes to g2, it would be a mate if in fact it is a mate. It would not have been a mate if white could capture the black queen, otherwise it's mate. And there's no way that white can capture the black queen on g2, so this is a mate. Let's see here what's happening. This is, how they call it? the scale mate or something like that, because the rook will go from to d6 to h6 check, and the queen, the rook controls the h file and the queen the g file. I don't think that white can escape. I think it's mate in one move. Here what's happening, and white is ready to promote, so black ready, be ready to do something fast. So black cannot check. In fact, they can check from b3, but from b6, but they are going only to lose the rook. That's not it. What else can they do to stop the pawn from promoting? Rook can go either to b8 or to d2. If it goes to b8, the king can go, the white king can go to d5 and win the pawn. But if the rook goes to d2, the white king cannot go to the d file and win a pawn. Of course, can go to c7 and help the pawn promote, but then rook sacrifices itself and the e pawn is near promotion. Let's see if this is the case. Yes, we push the pawn, we push the pawn, we take the queen, and we push the pawn, and now the pawn promotes. Let's see here what's happening. If rook from f8 goes to f3, the king has only one square to escape, h4. But how can we continue the attack? If the rook goes from f2 to h2, the king can only go to g5. Then we can check the pawn on h6. King goes to g6, and then rook goes down to f6, and it's mate. Let's see if this is the case. I had to see how many moves I had. 1, 2, 3, and 4 moves ahead. It's not easy to see 4 moves ahead. Of course, here it's a little bit easier because white has only one response. But even that takes some practice. But let's see if we got it right, because we may have it wrong. Yes, yes, and yes. And of course, we could avoid the squares controlled by the knight in all this time. Let's see here what's happening. We got 20 already, correct? 20 out of 20. If rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and then and we better hurry, because if it was white turn to move, then rook from d3 takes rook on d8, rook on e8 takes back, and then queen takes. It's going to be very, very difficult for black. So black needs to do something like what? If we exchange rooks, queen can only check from a1, but then then we win the rook at h1. Yes, we win an extra rook. Let's see if this is the answer. We exchange rooks. Queen can only check from a1, cannot check from b1 or c1. And now, anything better than winning the rook? Not that I can see. I wish I was a mate, but at least let's get to the rook, and we have extra material. Here, the white king is suffocating. So we have the knight on d4. If it goes to 3, it's mate. The only square that the king might be able to go would be d2, but there it's also controlled by the knight on f3. And we continue 22 out of 22, the half of the previous time's record. It's great. Here, let's see what's happening. If the bishop was not on h8, rook goes g7 check, h7, then the other rook from b7 to g7 is made, but that cannot happen. If rook goes to g7 check, bishop takes, rook from b7 check, king to h8. But there's something else. Forget about the rooks. What if the pawn from h6 goes to h7 check, and I think it is mate. The king has nowhere to go. Next one, number 24. What is attacking? But if queen goes to c6 check, if queen goes to, forget about c6 because black has two replies. If queen goes to b5, the white queen from d7 to b5, the king can only go to a7. If now the bishop goes from g5 to e3, he has nowhere to go, but there's a pawn from c7 to c5. Bishop cannot take it because it will be taken by the d6. Let's see, queen b5, king a7. Bishop goes to e3, pawn goes to c5. After that, if bishop is sacrificed, then I don't see anything better than that. If queen goes to c6, first of all, queen cannot go to c6. It is alone and going to be captured, clearly. Queen goes to b5 check. Now let's continue. Let's be careful. There are two ways to check. Queen can go to a5, but king goes b7 or b8, and so what? If bishop goes to e3, the pawn goes to c5. This is the most promising, not directly made, but the most promising. Yes. Now here is the big question. How do we capture on c5? We can capture either with the bishop, sacrifice itself, then the pawn on d6 will take, or of course forget about the queen, or the pawn on b4 can take to c5. That is very tricky. And now the knight on h5, let's assume that of the combinations, the line is empty. The queen cannot take it because there's a pawn on g6. If the pawn goes to a5, we threaten mate queen to b6, but black has ways to stop it. If queen goes to a5, queen goes to d7, exchange queens, but the pawn on d7 will not promote. Oh yeah, we'd better be careful because we're near the first error. The most forcing move is bishop from e3 going to c5 because black has only one, basically two, but they'll not take back with the queen. There's one reasonable response. Well, if they take with the pawn, it's not a check, so black has quite a few ways to reply, including queen to a6, and then the queen on b5 is pinned, and there is no combination any longer. In a real game, you would have to think of all of them. There is no guarantee that the forcing move is the winning move. You may end up losing a bishop and being below in material, but since it's a problem, I can't see how else to continue. Nope, wrong, error. The first error after 23 correct. Here, what can we do? This knight on c6 blocks the queen on f3, I'm sorry, blocks the queen from g3 doing any check because queen goes to any reasonable any square to check, the knight will grab it. If the rook from g8 goes to e8, king goes to, here we are, king goes to d3, and then queen goes to g6 check. Only rook from e1 can go to e4, and then queen grabs rook mate. Let's see if this is the answer. Second move. And third move, and I think this is mate. Good. After what, we have 24 correct out of 25. What would happen if queen went to e8 check? Then the only reply for black is rook to f8, but bishop to f7 check, king to h8, and then it's mate. See, bishop to f8 check. The rook cannot take the bishop because it's pinned, but now the queen can take the rook, and it's mate. Another one correct. Let's see here what's happening. Doesn't seem to have is the answer. If the rook goes from f1 to d1, attacks the black queen and supported by the bishop on f3. Of course, if white wins a queen, although it's not mate, white has won the game. What can black do to defend? The queen can move anywhere it wants, but then the bishop on d5 is attacked 3 times by queen, rook, and bishop, and defended only twice by queen and rook. Let's see if this is the case, because if I was playing a real game, would be a move that I would be tempted to play. Yes. How do we win the bishop? We have to be careful. There are 3 ways to win it. If we win it, for example, with the rook, then queen can go to f1 and it's back rank mate. If a queen from a5 takes d5, then the rook takes back and we lose a queen. So I think the only reasonable way is with a bishop. We got this right. Here, the diagonal black pushed the, white pushed the f and g pawns and gives, without pushing the s, and gives black a wonderful opportunity, the queen from d8 to go to h4 with a check. Then where can the king go? If it goes to f1, queen to f2, mate immediately. If it goes to e2 again, queen to f2, mate immediately. Got this right. That's why the opening is very, very to start pushing pawns in front of the king. In fact, any pawn we push, we must have a good reason to do it. Otherwise, it can be tough. What can happen here? Oh, white is attacking. He's already pinned the rook on f7, the white queen. Can black check? They can check with the queen on d8 and bishop on h4. Either one of them can go to g5. And there is a question of so what then? If the queen goes to g5, the problem is that even if somehow black wins the bishop on f5, they lose the own bishop on h4, on g5, excuse me, they lose the bishop on h4. But look at the material, who is ahead? I think that black has an extra piece or not, a piece for 2 pawns. So I think black is okay to just exchange bishops. Let's see if this is the case. Queen goes to g5 with a check. Yes. They win the bishop and they win the queen. And yes, they would lose their bishop, but they are ahead a piece for 2 pawns and plus the double black pawns. Now here what's happening. This is a case where it looks like a back rank, but white has the rook on a1. White can check with the knight on d4. So what? If it goes to f2, excuse me, if it goes to e2, it's captured. If it goes to f3, it would be captured the pawn. What would happen if queen went to c3, attacks the rook on a1, but once again, so what? And still, the rooks defend each other. Even that is not a big deal. Knight goes to e2 check, king goes f1 or h1. What is the material? Difficult to compare because they're different things. Black has 9, 12, 15, 17. White has 10, 13, 14, 17. So yes, if black wins an exchange, theoretically it will be a heavy material, but with so distant material, that doesn't mean too much. If black could force the rook from a1 to go anywhere, they'll win the other rook. If the only thing I can think is if a rook, actually, if knight, the black knight goes to c2, then it attacks the rook on e1, and if the rook on e1 moves, then the rook on a2 is lost. The only thing I think is knight goes to c2. No, wrong. Let's see here what is happening. If bishop from c8 goes to h3, how can white reply? I think they cannot, because the knight on f3 covers e1, g1, the bishop covers g2, and the rook covers e2. I think that is a mate. Yes, we got it right. 29 correct, 2 wrong until now. Here, black is to play. Their queen is attacked, but if they get... How is the material going? Queen, 2 rooks, 3. Uh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, black is below by 1. If they take the queen on e2, it's a check, so they have enough time to save the other queen on c7. Let's see if this is the case. Wrong. Let's see what did we do wrong. We only got 29. Out of the 44, we are down to 29. That's life. We didn't do well. I think 29 was the lowest we had some time ago. And let's go to the previous ones to see what's happening. What is the solution? B5, yes. Bishop here, yes. And pawn takes pawn is the correct answer. Wait a minute. Materially, black is ahead by a rook. And if the pawn from d6 takes on c5, is a bishop takes, yes, and white will win the queen. So this is one that we should have gone with original instinct. Of course, as I mentioned before, the queen, black queen can go to a6 and pin the queen on b5. But if the pawn continues, another check, and yep, we got it wrong. Let's see the next one here. Let's see the solution. We thought that the rook would have to go to c2 with tons of threats. No, e2, win the exchange, but I don't understand that white did not have to take. They could have moved their king, maybe not to f1 because we have discovered checks, but definitely to h1. And then the knight can go to g3 with the next check, but it can be captured. I can't see how it would continue. But that's what they want, a solution. Let's do the last one. Because if you take the queen, even if the bishop captures it from c4, then the queen on c7 can go to tons of squares and be safe. What does it happen if knight takes on f3? Ooh! Yes, I saw it. Knight takes on f3, and then no matter how white captures, then the queen goes to h2 and it's mate. Okay, I saw it a little bit too late. Yes, and mate. Okay, so we got 29 correct. Hope we all learn from that. And of course, if you want, you can always do these puzzles on your own. It's a great way to learn. In the tournaments, I don't think anything has changed in the two tournaments we were following. One quick look. Exactly two games remaining between Maxim Govorucha and Barak Seven. Let's see the other one. A few games have already been completed in round two. See how things go there. And you see what's happening in there are four groups of 7 players each. In group one, you have Maxim Govorucha and AMMT leading with 3 points. Maxim Govorucha is once again without having lost even half of a point, 3 out of 3. The first 3 advance in its case. In the second one, LSMSTL has timed out all the games. So there's a tie between 3 players, PGO74, Gandalf 66, and Mathis B 2008 with 3 points, leading ahead with PGO74 being the only one not having lost any point. In next group 3, Iraq Lion is leading with 3 points. And in group 4, Lysithia Vantres is leading with 2 points. There's a lot to take on to going on for round 2 until it's completed. But that's it for now. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. We'll continue these videos and we have more bots to come. Let's give a look at the bots that we have to face. Let's share the screen once again. Play bots. The next one online is going to be the white pieces. We're going to face David from Peru with a rating of 1400. Let's see how well can we do against David. And then we have Ali from Indonesia and Mateo, I think, is from Argentina, if I see correctly. These are the last remaining intermediate bots before we go to the advanced. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. I'm Harry Lasaniziris. This is the YouTube channel grecochess. Thanks to all the viewers, subscribers, the likes, and the comments. But for now, goodbye.